The unexpected journey begins. General Maya Matthews stood in the long line at the bustling airport, her crisp military uniform setting her apart from the sea of casual travelers around her. With her head held high and a calm yet authoritative demeanor, she surveyed the airport terminal. After months of serving overseas, the thought of returning home to her family filled her with a sense of relief and anticipation. Her husband, James, with his ever-optimistic smile, had been a pillar of support throughout her career. Her children, Zoe and Marcus, were her greatest joys, their laughter echoing in her mind as she made her way through the terminal. Zoe, her 12-year-old daughter, was just beginning to come into her own, sharp-witted and spirited, while Marcus, her 6-year-old son, was full of curiosity and energy. Maya couldn't wait to embrace them, to tell them all the stories she had collected during her deployment, and to simply bask in the warmth of home. It was these moments she cherished most, the simple joys of family life. As she pulled out her first-class ticket, she smiled to herself. This seat was a small luxury she allowed after long, grueling months of service. The announcement for boarding snapped her out of her reverie. She approached the gate, showing her first-class ticket with pride. The gate agent, a young woman with a cheerful smile, nodded and waved her through. However, as Maya neared the entrance to the plane, a tall, stern-looking man in a dark suit stood by the door. His eyes narrowed as he watched her approach. "Excuse me," he said sharply, stepping into her path, blocking her from boarding. His name tag read John Hayes, and though his expression remained professional, there was a coldness in his voice. "Let me see your ticket, please." Maya raised an eyebrow, but handed over her first-class ticket without hesitation. She had grown used to certain challenges in life, especially as a woman of color in a male-dominated military, but this situation felt different. There was no reason for the sudden hostility from this man. John scrutinized the ticket for what seemed like an unnecessary amount of time, his brow furrowing in suspicion. "Are you sure this is the right ticket for you?" Maya's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. "Yes, it is. I'm flying first class today." John looked at her uniform, then back at the ticket, and for a moment, his eyes flashed with something Maya recognized all too well: disdain. "First class," he repeated, his voice laced with doubt. "I think there might be a mistake. You don't belong in first class. It's best if you take a seat in economy." Maya's heart skipped a beat, not in shock, but in disbelief. The blatant disrespect of this man's tone stung more than the words themselves. She straightened her posture, towering over him by just a few inches, her eyes cold and unyielding. "There is no mistake. I belong in first class, and I will be sitting in the seat I paid for." For a brief moment, John faltered, but then his lips curled into a sneer. "Look, I don't care what uniform you're wearing. Just because you're some army woman doesn't mean you're entitled to special treatment. You need to know your place." Maya could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but she was a professional. She had faced far worse than a prejudiced man trying to assert his authority. "I know my place," she said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of her years of service. "And it's in first class. Now, if you would kindly step aside." A few passengers nearby had begun to notice the confrontation, their curious eyes shifting between Maya and John. But John wasn't done. With a smug grin, he said, "You know, it's funny. People like you always think you deserve more than you do. You probably got that uniform as part of some diversity quota. But out here, that doesn't mean anything." Maya's heart pounded with controlled fury, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose her composure. She had faced countless challenges in her career, but this moment felt like a culmination of every battle she had fought to prove her worth. Before she could respond, a voice interrupted from behind. "Is there a problem here?" Maya turned to see another flight attendant, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, approaching. Her name tag read Sarah, and her expression immediately softened as she took in the situation. "No problem at all," John said quickly, trying to dismiss the situation. I was just explaining to this passenger that she needs to be seated in economy. Sarah glanced at Maya, then back at John, and something shifted in her expression. This passenger is clearly holding a first-class ticket, she said firmly. There's no need to send her to economy. John's smug grin faded slightly, but he wasn't ready to back down just yet. Well, I was just making sure. We can't be too careful these days. Sarah shot him a look that could cut through steel. I'll handle it from here. Please, continue boarding the other passengers. Reluctantly, John stepped aside, his expression dark and brooding as he turned his attention back to the gate. Sarah gave Maya a sympathetic smile. I'm sorry about that, she said quietly. Please, let me help you to your seat. Maya nodded, her heart still racing from the confrontation. As they walked toward the first-class cabin, Maya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the way she had handled herself. But she also knew that this encounter was far from over. As she settled into her seat, Sarah leaned in close. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Maya thanked her, but her mind was already turning. She had dealt with people like John before, but something about this situation felt different. It wasn't just about her first-class seat. It was about respect, about standing up for what was right. And Maya Matthews had never been one to back down from a fight. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya gazed out the window, her thoughts drifting between the peaceful homecoming she had envisioned and the unexpected battle she now faced. She had no intention of letting this slide. She had fought too hard to get to where she was, and she wasn't about to let someone like John Hayes make her feel small. Little did she know, her stand today would set off a chain of events that would change more lives than her own. The quiet strength of a warrior. As the plane ascended into the clear sky, General Maya Matthews stared out of the small oval window, her reflection mixing with the clouds beyond. The confrontation with John Hayes still lingered in her mind, a faint bruise on what was supposed to be a peaceful return home. But she was not one to be deterred easily. Maya knew battles weren't always fought with weapons or on the battlefield. Sometimes they were fought in the everyday moments where dignity, respect, and fairness were challenged. Settling back into her first-class seat, Maya allowed herself a moment to breathe. The seat was more comfortable than she remembered. Plush leather, ample legroom, and a quiet space that was in stark contrast to the chaos outside. She pulled out her phone and checked for messages from her family. As expected, her husband James had sent her several photos of their children, Zoe and Marcus, getting ready for her arrival. Zoe had grown taller, just as she had predicted, and Marcus looked more animated than ever. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she swiped through the pictures, feeling a surge of warmth. Despite the incident with John, nothing could dim the joy of returning to her family. They were her anchor in a world that sometimes felt too chaotic to navigate. As the flight attendants moved about the cabin, offering drinks and snacks, Maya felt Sarah, the kind attendant who had intervened earlier, hover near her seat. She didn't speak right away, but instead leaned down slightly to hand Maya a glass of water with a quiet smile. "If you need anything, just let me know," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with empathy. Maya nodded, appreciating the gesture, but her mind was already elsewhere. She had faced discrimination before, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, but something about John Hayes' attitude gnawed at her more than usual. Perhaps it was the fatigue of being constantly judged by her appearance, or perhaps it was the fact that this wasn't just any trip home. This flight represented her hard-earned rest after months of serving her country. The indignity of being told she didn't belong in a seat she had rightfully earned stung in a way she hadn't expected. As the plane leveled out and the passengers around her began to settle in for the long flight, Maya allowed herself to reflect on her journey, a journey not just defined by miles, but by years of hard work, perseverance, and silent battles fought in the shadows. Maya wasn't born into a family of wealth or privilege. She had grown up in a small town in Georgia, raised by parents who had worked tirelessly as educators in an underfunded school district. Her father, Samuel Matthews, had been a history teacher, and her mother, Linda, taught English. They weren't rich, but they were rich in spirit, instilling in Maya and her two brothers a sense of pride in their heritage and a firm belief that hard work could overcome any obstacle. Maya had always been a dreamer, but more than that, she was a doer. From an early age, she had ambitions that stretched far beyond the limits of her small town. While her classmates talked about staying close to home after high school, Maya had her eyes set on something bigger, serving her country, making a difference, and breaking barriers that others thought were impenetrable. She was determined to prove, not just to herself but to the world, that a black woman from a small town could rise to the rank of general in the United States Army. It wasn't an easy road. Maya faced her fair share of challenges: overt racism, sexism, and moments where she was made to feel like an outsider, even within her own ranks. But every time she was pushed down, she got back up. The military had taught her discipline, resilience, and the art of quiet strength. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, but Maya had learned to carry that weight with grace. Her parents had always told her that greatness wasn't achieved through force alone. It was achieved through persistence, humility, and an unwavering belief in oneself. Her rise through the ranks had not gone unnoticed. Over the years, Maya had earned the respect of her peers and superiors, not just for her tactical brilliance, but for her leadership and ability to remain calm under pressure. But even as she climbed the ladder of success, she never forgot where she came from, or the people who had helped her along the way. Yet, for every victory, there were moments like this one on the plane. Moments where her accomplishments and the uniform she wore were overshadowed by ignorance and prejudice. Maya knew she had earned her seat in first class, but John Hayes had seen only her skin color and her gender. He had made assumptions based on his own narrow view of the world, and Maya had been forced, once again, to defend her place. Halfway through the flight, Sarah returned to check on her. This time, her face was more serious, as if she had something important to say. "I'm really sorry about what happened earlier," Sarah began, leaning in so she wouldn't be overheard by the other passengers. "I've seen John act that way before, but this time, it was worse. I just want you to know that I don't stand for that kind of behavior." Maya regarded Sarah with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she replied. "I appreciate you stepping in." "I've already reported him to our supervisor," Sarah continued. "There's no excuse for what he did, and I want you to know that you're not alone in this." Maya nodded, feeling a surge of respect for Sarah's courage to stand up against a colleague. It wasn't easy to challenge one's own team, but it was necessary. "I'm glad you did. People like him need to be held accountable." As Sarah walked away, Maya's thoughts turned to the broader issue at hand. It wasn't just about John Hayes and his prejudiced behavior. It was about the countless others who experienced the same treatment every day, in airports, offices, and schools. Places where their achievements were disregarded because of who they were or what they looked like. Maya had always believed in the power of quiet strength, but perhaps there were moments when quiet strength wasn't enough. Perhaps it was time to speak up, to demand that the world see her and others like her for their true worth, not just their appearance. As the plane continued its journey across the ocean, Maya began formulating a plan. She had faced enough discrimination in her life to know that staying silent allowed the cycle to continue. It was time to make a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told they didn't belong in spaces they had rightfully earned. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but Maya could sense the tension lingering in the air. John Hayes had disappeared, likely hiding from the repercussions of his actions, but Maya wasn't done with him yet. She had every intention of filing a formal complaint, but more than that, she intended to make this moment count. When the plane finally touched down at its destination, Maya was greeted by the familiar sounds of the airport, announcements over the PA system, the rush of passengers gathering their belongings, the beep of luggage carts. But beneath the noise, she felt a quiet sense of resolve. As she exited the plane, she noticed John standing by the exit, his eyes avoiding hers. He offered a half-hearted, "Have a good day," But Maya didn't respond. She walked past him, her mind already focused on what came next. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. As Maya stepped into the terminal, the warmth of her family waiting for her at the other end, she knew she had a choice to make. She could let this incident go, forgive and forget, as she had done so many times before, or she could fight, not with anger, but with the quiet, persistent strength that had carried her through life. And Maya Matthews had never been one to walk away from a fight. The spark of change. As Maya stepped into the crowded terminal, her heart soared at the sight of her family waiting for her. James stood tall, his warm smile lighting up his face, and next to him, Zoe and Marcus were bouncing with excitement, barely able to contain themselves. Zoe, with her hair tied back in a high ponytail, waved enthusiastically while Marcus jumped up and down, clutching a hand-drawn "Welcome home, Mom" sign. It was moments like these that made all the struggles, the long months away from home, and the weight of responsibility worth it. Maya quickened her pace, dropping her bag to the floor as Zoe and Marcus rushed toward her. They embraced her, their small arms wrapping around her waist tightly, as if they could keep her home just by holding on. "We missed you so much," Zoe said, her voice tinged with both joy and relief. "I missed you too, sweetie," Maya whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head before kneeling down to meet Marcus's eager eyes. "And you, little man. I've missed all of your adventures." Marcus grinned widely, showing off a missing tooth. "I've been saving up stories just for you, Mom. Wait till you hear what happened at school." Maya chuckled, her heart swelling with love. She stood up to greet James, who pulled her into a warm, comforting embrace. "Welcome home, Maya," he said softly, his lips brushing against her forehead. "It hasn't been the same without you." "I'm glad to be back," she murmured, resting in the familiarity of his arms. For a moment, she allowed herself to forget about the flight, about John Hayes, about the tension that still simmered in her mind. All that mattered was this, her family. But that peace didn't last long. As they made their way to the baggage claim, the memory of the earlier confrontation crept back into her thoughts. The sting of John's words still lingered, not just because of their blatant racism, but because they represented a deeper systemic issue she had faced throughout her life. She had endured similar moments in the military, in the workplace, and even in everyday interactions. The uniform she wore, the title she held, and the accomplishments she had earned should have shielded her from such treatment. But they hadn't. James must have noticed her change in mood, because he gently squeezed her hand. "Everything all right, Maya?" he asked, his voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. Maya hesitated, glancing at her children, who were now walking ahead, chattering excitedly about dinner plans. She didn't want to dampen the moment, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than a bad flight experience. It was a reminder of how much more work there was to be done. "There was an incident on the plane," Maya finally said, keeping her tone measured. "One of the attendants, he tried to move me out of first class. Said I didn't belong there." James's brow furrowed, a mixture of concern and anger flashing across his face. "What? Why?" Because of who I am," Maya said, her voice tightening. "Because I'm a black woman in a military uniform. And that didn't fit his idea of who should be sitting in first class." James sighed deeply, his hand still gripping hers. "Maya, I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Not after everything you've done. Not ever." Maya shook her head, her jaw set with determination. "No, I shouldn't. But this isn't about me, James. It's about all the people like me who are constantly told they don't belong. It's about the assumptions people like John make every single day. And I can't just walk away from it this time." James nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. "So, what are you going to do?" "I'm filing a formal complaint. For starters," Maya said, her voice resolute. "But that's just the beginning. I'm tired of letting this stuff slide, tired of hoping someone else will take a stand. If I don't do something, who will?" James' expression softened, and he pulled her into a gentle hug. "You're right. You've always been the one to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And I'm with you, every step of the way." Maya smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her first-class seat. It was about something much larger. Her whole life had been a testament to breaking barriers and proving people wrong. She had fought her way up through the ranks of the military, shattered glass ceilings, and earned respect in a world that often tried to push her aside. But now, it wasn't enough to quietly lead by example. It was time to confront these injustices head-on. Later that evening, after the family had settled in and dinner was winding down, Maya sat in her study, reviewing the video footage that the young woman on the plane had sent her. The footage was clear, capturing John's dismissive tone, his refusal to accept her first-class ticket, and the uncomfortable silence of the passengers who had witnessed it all. The video wasn't just evidence of one man's prejudice. It was a reflection of a broader, more insidious problem. Maya knew the power of stories, how they could shift public opinion, ignite change, and bring light to issues that often went unnoticed. She had seen it happen in the military, when stories of discrimination had led to policy changes and a more inclusive environment. Now she had the chance to be part of a story that could spark a similar change, this time in the world beyond the military. With a deep breath, Maya opened her laptop and began drafting her complaint to the airline. She detailed everything that had happened, from John's initial hostility to Sarah's intervention, and attached the video footage. But she didn't stop there. She also began writing a public statement, one that she planned to share on her social media platforms and with news outlets. In her statement, she didn't just focus on her experience. She highlighted the larger issue of racial profiling and discrimination in everyday spaces. She talked about the importance of holding people accountable, not just for the harm they cause, but for the systems that enable that harm. She called on others to share their stories and to demand better from companies, institutions, and individuals who perpetuate these injustices. As she typed, Maya felt a surge of empowerment. She wasn't just reacting to what had happened to her. She was taking control of the narrative. She was turning a moment of personal humiliation into a call for collective action. And she knew that her voice, amplified by the voices of others who had faced similar struggles, could make a difference. The next morning, Maya's post went live. She had expected a slow response, maybe a few likes, a few shares. But within hours, her inbox was flooded with messages of support. People from all walks of life, many of whom had experienced similar acts of discrimination, reached out to thank her for speaking up. Some shared their own stories, while others simply offered words of encouragement. And then, the media caught wind of it. Several news outlets contacted her, asking for interviews. They wanted to hear more about the incident, about her military career, and about her perspective on racial discrimination in everyday life. Maya agreed to a few interviews, realizing that this was an opportunity to bring even more attention to the issue. But as the story gained traction, Maya knew that it wasn't enough to just talk about the problem. She needed to push for concrete change. She began drafting a letter to the airline CEO, demanding that they address the behavior of employees like John Hayes and implement mandatory anti-bias training for all staff members. She also connected with advocacy groups focused on racial justice and equality, looking for ways to amplify the message beyond her own platform. A week later, Maya was sitting in her living room, watching the news when the story broke. The airline had publicly apologized for the incident and announced that they would be implementing new policies to prevent discrimination in the future. John Hayes, the flight attendant who had denied her seat, had been placed on suspension pending an investigation. Maya felt a sense of victory, but she knew the work was far from over. This was just one battle in a much larger war, a war she had been fighting her entire life. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The outpouring of support from strangers, the stories shared by people who had faced similar challenges, had given her hope. Together, they were stronger. Together, they could make a difference. As she sat there, Reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment, Maya realized something profound. Standing up for herself wasn't just an act of personal courage, it was an act of collective resistance. And she would continue standing, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. The awakening of a movement. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, the screen glowing with the steady stream of messages pouring in. It had been only a few days since her story went public, and already it had struck a chord with people across the country. Her initial post had been shared thousands of times, and each time someone commented or messaged her with their own experiences, Maya felt the power of her decision to speak out. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the countless others who had been dismissed, belittled, or discriminated against in ways big and small. She had become, almost overnight, the face of a growing conversation about racial bias, privilege, and the need for systemic change. Interviews with major news outlets had followed, each one giving her a larger platform to tell her story. It felt surreal to see her face on TV, hear her voice broadcast over the airwaves. But with that visibility came responsibility. Maya wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was representing every person who had been wronged by the casual racism and bias that too often went unchecked. As she scrolled through her messages, one in particular caught her attention. It was from a woman named Elaine Barnes, a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases. Her message was succinct but powerful. General Matthews, I've seen the media coverage surrounding your recent experience. I wanted to reach out because I believe your case represents more than just an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of discrimination that needs to be addressed in court. If you're interested in exploring legal action, I would love to discuss your options. Please let me know if you'd like to speak further. Maya stared at the message, her mind racing. Legal action. She hadn't even considered that as a possibility. Her primary focus had been on raising awareness and pushing for change within the airline. But as she thought more about it, the idea of taking legal action made sense. This wasn't just about getting an apology or a policy change. It was about holding people accountable in a way that forced systemic changes beyond just one company. If her case could set a precedent, it might prevent countless others from experiencing the same discrimination. She hesitated for a moment, thinking about what it would mean to take this step. Legal battles were long, exhausting, and public. Did she really want to put herself through that? Did she want to put her family through that? But then she remembered the look in John Hayes' eyes, the casual way he had dismissed her, as if she didn't belong, as if her accomplishments meant nothing. She remembered the stories she had read from others, stories of people who had been turned away, humiliated, or worse, simply because of who they were. And she knew the answer. Maya clicked reply and began typing. 2 days later, Maya found herself in a sleek, modern law office in downtown Atlanta, sitting across from Elaine Barnes. Elaine was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, with a reputation for taking on tough cases and winning. She had a quiet intensity about her, the kind of focus that made you feel like she saw right through you. I'm glad you decided to meet, Elaine said, leaning back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her. I've reviewed the footage you sent me, and there's no question that what happened to you was discrimination. But beyond that, I believe we have grounds to pursue a larger case, not just against the airline, but against the broader issue of racial bias in customer service. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and unless we make it a legal issue, it won't be the last. Maya nodded, her resolve strengthening as Elaine spoke. I want to do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, she said. I've heard too many stories from people who've experienced similar things. It's time for this to stop. Elaine's eyes gleamed with approval. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. Here's what I'm thinking. We file a lawsuit against the airline for racial discrimination, but we also leverage this case to push for industry-wide changes. We'll demand that all major airlines implement anti-bias training for their employees, and we'll push for federal legislation that requires it across all transportation sectors. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This was bigger than she had imagined. Federal legislation, she asked, her voice tinged with both awe and trepidation. Elaine nodded firmly. That's the goal. Cases like yours can set legal precedents. If we win this, it could force every airline, and potentially other industries, to rethink how they train their staff and how they handle discrimination. But it's going to take time, and it's going to be a fight. Maya sat back in her chair, absorbing the weight of what Elaine was proposing. This wasn't just about getting justice for herself anymore. This was about making history. It was a daunting thought, but at the same time, Maya felt ready. She had spent her life fighting battles, both personal and professional, and this was just one more challenge. But this time, the stakes were higher. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'm in." Elaine smiled, a look of respect crossing her features. "I knew you would be." As the legal proceedings began to take shape, Maya's life became a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and public appearances. Her story had struck a nerve in the national consciousness, and the media attention showed no signs of slowing down. But with that attention came backlash. Not everyone was supportive. Some people accused her of overreacting, of making a big deal out of nothing. Others claimed she was using her position in the military to gain sympathy. And then there were the messages filled with blatant racism, hate, and vitriol. Messages that reminded her just how deep the problem truly ran. James, ever the supportive husband, stood by her through it all. He knew what this fight meant to her, but he also saw the toll it was starting to take. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, they would sit together on the couch, and James would wrap his arms around her, offering silent comfort. "You're doing the right thing," he would whisper, as if reading the doubts in her mind. "Don't let them make you second-guess yourself." Maya would nod, leaning into him for strength. But the pressure was undeniable. Every day brought new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. And yet, Maya knew that she couldn't stop now. She had already come too far. There were too many people depending on her, too many stories that had yet to be told. Weeks passed, and as Maya's case gained momentum, something incredible began to happen. People from all over the country started organizing. Inspired by Maya's bravery and her willingness to take on the system, grassroots movements began to form. Activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens joined together, calling for change, not just in the airline industry, but in every facet of public life where racial discrimination persisted. The media began to call it the Matthews Movement, a growing demand for accountability and justice in how people of color were treated in everyday situations. Protests were organized at airports, rallies held outside corporate offices, and petitions circulated online, garnering hundreds of thousands of signatures. Maya found herself at the center of it all, not by choice, but by circumstance. She had never set out to become a symbol of resistance, but as the movement grew, so did her sense of responsibility. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to all of them. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of interviews and meetings, Maya sat at her desk, staring at a letter she had received in the mail. It was from a young girl named Aisha, who had written to thank Maya for her courage. "Dear General Matthews," the letter began. "I'm 14 years old, and I live in a small town in Alabama. I've always wanted to be a pilot, but sometimes people laugh at me when I tell them my dream. They say a black girl like me can't do something like that. But then I saw your story on the news, and I realized that they're wrong. You showed me that I can be anything I want to be, and I just wanted to say thank you. You're my hero." Maya blinked back tears as she read the letter, her heart swelling with emotion. Aisha's words reminded her of why she had started this fight in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but to pave the way for the next generation, to ensure that girls like Aisha wouldn't have to fight the same battles she had fought, to show them that they belonged, no matter what the world told them. With renewed determination, Maya folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer, knowing that the fight was far from over. But for the first time, she felt a deep, unshakable belief that they would win. Not just the lawsuit, but the larger battle for equality and justice. Because this wasn't just her story anymore. It was theirs. Standing at the crossroads of change, Maya stood before the large conference table in a downtown law office, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the lawyers, activists, and community leaders who had gathered for what had become a pivotal meeting. The Matthews movement, as it was now being called, had gained momentum far beyond what she had ever imagined. What had begun as a personal battle over a discriminatory incident on an airplane had blossomed into a nationwide call for reform, particularly in industries where implicit bias had long gone unchecked. Elaine Barnes, Maya's lawyer and now trusted advisor, sat at the head of the table, reviewing the latest legal documents. She glanced up at Maya and gave her a nod of encouragement. Today's meeting wasn't just about the lawsuit. It was about the broader movement, the strategies they would employ moving forward, and the increasing demand from the public for systemic change. Maya cleared her throat, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but firm. "When this started, I didn't expect any of this. I was just one person standing up for myself in a situation that felt wrong. But now," she gestured to the room, "now this has become something much bigger. We have the chance to change how entire industries treat people of color, how they train their staff, how they confront discrimination head-on." The room remained silent, the gravity of the situation palpable. Across from her, a man named Marcus Lee, a respected civil rights leader, leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "You've ignited something powerful, General Matthews," he said, his deep voice resonating through the room. "The movement is growing, and people are rallying behind you. But with that comes greater responsibility. There are forces out there who don't want to see this succeed. They'll push back harder than ever." Maya nodded. She had already seen the signs of that resistance: online threats, hate mail, and even a few high-profile pundits on television dismissing her cause as overblown or unnecessary. Some argued that she was milking the situation for attention, while others flatly denied that racial bias existed in the airline industry, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But Maya had always been a fighter, and she knew that the toughest battles were the ones most worth fighting. Elaine took over, flipping through a thick legal binder. "We've filed the lawsuit, and the airline has been served," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "But the real challenge will come in court. They're not going to admit fault easily. They've already hired one of the top defense teams in the country. We need to be prepared for a drawn-out legal battle." Maya didn't flinch. "I'm ready for that." Elaine's lips curled into a slight smile. "Good, because we've got a strong case. The video evidence alone is damning, and the public support is on our side. But we need to keep the pressure on, not just legally but socially. The more attention we bring to this, the harder it will be for them to sweep it under the rug." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We're organizing a national day of action," he said, "protests at airports across the country, demanding anti-bias training and stronger policies against racial profiling. This isn't just about your case, Maya. This is about changing the way people are treated, no matter what they look like or where they come from." Maya felt a surge of pride at the way the movement had grown. What had started as a single voice of resistance was now a chorus, demanding justice and reform. But with that pride came a sense of responsibility she had never experienced before. She wasn't just a general in the army anymore. She was a general in a new kind of battle, leading an army of people who were tired of being silenced, dismissed, and overlooked. As the weeks went by, the lawsuit progressed slowly but steadily. The airline's defense team tried to drag things out, hoping to wear Maya down. But Elaine and her legal team were relentless. Every time the airline tried to discredit her or downplay the incident, Maya stood firm, refusing to be intimidated. She gave interviews, spoke at public rallies, and met with lawmakers, all while balancing her responsibilities as a mother, wife, and military leader. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt crushing, when the hate mail and online trolls seemed louder than the voices of support. On those days, Maya would retreat to her study, where she kept the letters from supporters like Aisha, the young girl who dreamed of becoming a pilot. Those letters reminded her of why she had started this fight in the first place, because for every person who told her to sit down and be quiet, there were 100 others who needed her to stand up and be loud. One evening, after putting Marcus and Zoe to bed, Maya sat on the couch with James, her head resting against his shoulder. The TV was on, tuned to a news station that was covering the latest developments in the lawsuit. James stroked her hair gently, sensing her exhaustion. "You're doing amazing, Maya," he said quietly. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. This is a long fight, and we need you strong." Maya sighed, her body sinking into the warmth of his embrace. "I know. It's just, some days it feels like the world is against me." James kissed the top of her head. "The world isn't against you. The people who matter are with you. And the ones who are against you, they're afraid of the change you're bringing." Maya smiled weakly, grateful for his unwavering support. "You're right, but it's hard sometimes, you know. I didn't sign up to be the face of a movement." "No," James agreed, "but you were born for it. You've been fighting for justice your whole life. Maya, this is just another battle." Maya closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. He was right. This wasn't just another battle. It was the battle. One she couldn't afford to lose, not just for herself, but for all the people counting on her to succeed. As the trial date approached, the pressure mounted. The airline's legal team pulled out all the stops, filing motions to dismiss the case, trying to undermine Maya's credibility by questioning her motives. They even tried to paint her as an opportunist, someone using her military status to gain sympathy. It was a tactic designed to turn the public against her, but it didn't work. Every time they tried to knock her down, Maya stood taller. Every attempt to discredit her only made her more determined. The day before the trial, Maya received a call from Elaine. "I just got word from the airline's legal team," Elaine said, her tone unreadable. "They're offering a settlement." Maya sat up straight, her heart skipping a beat. "A settlement? What are the terms?" "They're willing to pay a significant sum, enough to make most people walk away," Elaine said. "But here's the catch. They want a non-disclosure agreement. If you take the settlement, you won't be able to speak publicly about what happened, and they won't have to admit fault." Maya was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. The offer was tempting. She could take the money, put the ordeal behind her, and move on with her life. But the thought of signing a non-disclosure agreement, of silencing herself and allowing the airline to escape accountability, made her stomach turn. "Do you want my advice?" Elaine asked, sensing her hesitation. "Yes," Maya replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't take it," Elaine said bluntly. "This isn't about the money, and you know it. If you take the settlement, the airline walks away without having to change a damn thing. They'll keep doing what they've always done, and this will happen to someone else. You've come too far to back down now." Maya took a deep breath, her mind clearing. Elaine was right. This wasn't about money. It had never been about money. It was about justice. It was about holding the airline accountable, not just for what they had done to her, but for the way they treated people like her. "I'm not taking it," Maya said firmly. "We're going to trial." The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Journalists, supporters, and curious onlookers filled the seats, eager to see how the case would unfold. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in her full military uniform, a symbol of the strength and dignity she had carried throughout the ordeal. As the trial began, the airline's lawyers tried every trick in the book to undermine her case. They downplayed the significance of the incident, suggested that Maya had misinterpreted John Hay's actions, and even implied that she was using the situation for personal gain. But Maya's legal team was ready. Elaine had meticulously prepared the case, presenting the video footage, eyewitness testimony, and documentation that proved not only that Maya had been wronged, but that the airline had a pattern of similar incidents involving other people of color. When it was Maya's turn to testify, she spoke with the calm, steady authority that had earned her the rank of general. She didn't just talk about what had happened on the plane. She talked about the broader issue of racial bias in everyday life. She spoke about the countless stories she had heard from others who had faced similar discrimination, and she made it clear that this wasn't just about her. It was about changing a system that had long ignored the voices of people like her. By the time the trial ended, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. The airline's defense had crumbled under the weight of the evidence, and the jury's decision came swiftly. Maya had won. The courtroom erupted in applause as the judge announced the verdict, and Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. They had done it. But as she left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters, Maya knew that this was just the beginning. The lawsuit was only one part of the fight. The real battle was out there, in the streets, in the boardrooms, in the everyday interactions that shaped people's lives. And Maya was ready to keep fighting. The ripple effect of justice. The gavel's final thud echoed in the courtroom as the judge announced the jury's decision, and the reality of what had just happened washed over General Maya Matthews. She had won. The legal battle against the airline, the discrimination she had faced, the public scrutiny, it had all culminated in this moment of triumph. But as the crowd erupted in applause and journalists rushed forward to capture the moment, Maya understood that this victory was only the beginning of something much larger. This was more than a personal win. It was the beginning of a ripple that would spread far beyond the confines of this courtroom. Elaine Barnes, her ever-resilient attorney, placed a firm hand on her shoulder, giving her a look of quiet pride. "You did it," Elaine whispered. "We did it." Maya nodded, still processing the weight of the moment. "It wasn't just for me," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "It was for everyone." As Maya left the courtroom, the barrage of cameras, microphones, and eager reporters followed her. Their questions came fast and furious. "General Matthews, how does it feel to have won this landmark case? Do you think this verdict will lead to changes in the airline industry? What's next for the Matthews movement?" Maya paused for a moment, letting the questions hang in the air. She had expected this media frenzy, but standing in the center of it, she realized the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. This was no longer just about her fight. It had become a rallying cry for justice, for dignity, for every person who had been wronged by the subtle and not so subtle forms of discrimination embedded in everyday life. Stepping to the microphone, she took a deep breath and began. Today's verdict isn't just about one flight or one person's experience. This is about confronting a system that has allowed bias and discrimination to flourish unchecked. I'm grateful for the jury's decision, but the work is far from over. This victory is for every person who's been told they don't belong, for everyone who's been made to feel less than because of who they are. She looked directly into the cameras, her voice strong and resolute. We have to keep pushing for change, not just in the airline industry, but in every corner of society where people are marginalized and mistreated. This fight doesn't end here. It begins here. As she stepped away from the microphone, the crowd erupted into applause once again. Maya's heart swelled, but she remained grounded. She knew the road ahead would be long, filled with more challenges, but she had never been more ready to walk it. In the weeks following the trial, the effects of the verdict began to ripple across the nation. The media couldn't get enough of the Matthews movement, as it had now been coined. Major news outlets ran story after story about Maya's fight for justice, and soon, the conversation broadened to include stories from other people of color who had faced similar discriminatory experiences in industries far beyond just air travel. Airlines across the country were now scrambling to address the public outcry, issuing statements and rolling out promises of diversity and anti-bias training for their employees. But Maya wasn't content with just promises. She wanted real, measurable change, and she had the platform to demand it. Together with Elaine and a growing coalition of civil rights activists, Maya began drafting a proposal for federal legislation that would mandate comprehensive anti-bias training across not only the airline industry, but also other service industries like hospitality, retail, and healthcare. It was ambitious, but Maya knew that ambition was necessary if they wanted to make lasting change. As the proposal gained traction, Maya was invited to testify before Congress, where her story became the focal point of a larger national conversation about racial discrimination and the steps needed to address it at a systemic level. The hearing room was packed as Maya took her seat, ready to once again tell her story, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been in her shoes. "This isn't just about making sure that what happened to me never happens again," Maya said, her voice steady as she addressed the committee. "It's about making sure that the systems in place to protect and serve us are actually doing that for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background. We need accountability, and we need it now." Her testimony was powerful, leaving a lasting impact on the lawmakers in attendance. Within months, the proposed legislation, now dubbed the Matthews Act, gained bipartisan support and was passed through Congress. It mandated anti-bias training for all employees in the service industry and required companies to track and report incidents of discrimination, ensuring transparency and accountability. Maya had done what many had thought impossible. She had turned a personal act of injustice into a nationwide movement for equality. As the legal victories and legislative reforms took root, Maya's personal life began to settle back into a semblance of normalcy. She had returned to her military duties, balancing her career with her role as a mother and wife. Yet, her days were filled with speaking engagements, media appearances, and meetings with advocacy groups. The demands were endless, but Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment in knowing that her efforts were making a difference. One day, she received a letter that stopped her in her tracks. It was from John Hayes, the flight attendant who had tried to deny her first-class seat on that fateful flight. The letter was short, but its contents were profound. "Dear General Matthews, I owe you an apology, a real one. I've spent the last few months reflecting on my actions that day, and I now understand the harm I caused, not just to you, but to the people who witnessed it, and to myself. I see now that what I did was wrong, and I have no excuse. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I wanted to let you know that I'm committed to changing. I've started attending workshops on bias and prejudice, and I'm trying to unlearn the toxic behaviors that led to that day. I know I have a long way to go, but I just wanted you to know that your actions made a difference, not just for society, but for me. Sincerely, John Hayes." Maya read the letter twice, her emotions swirling. She had never expected to hear from John again, let alone receive an apology. But this wasn't about him. It was about the ripple effect of her actions, the way standing up for what was right could inspire even those on the other side to confront their own prejudices. That evening, as Maya sat with her family, she reflected on the long road that had brought her here. It had started with a single moment of injustice, but it had grown into something so much larger. The Matthews movement had sparked conversations, ignited change, and, most importantly, empowered people to stand up for themselves and for others. James, sitting next to her on the couch, noticed her thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on her knee. Maya smiled, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she said. "How much has changed because of all of this?" James nodded. "You've done something incredible, Maya. You've changed the world." Maya looked at him, her smile widening. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "It's because of people like you, and Zoe, and Marcus, and everyone who stood with me. This was never just my fight." They sat together in comfortable silence for a few moments before Marcus and Zoe burst into the room, laughing and chasing each other around the coffee table. Their laughter filled the house with warmth, a reminder of the simple joys that made everything worthwhile. Maya watched them, her heart full, knowing that the world they were growing up in would be just a little bit better because she had stood her ground. There was still so much work to do, but Maya was ready for whatever came next. As she leaned back into James's embrace, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had always known that her fight wasn't just about her own experiences. It was about creating a world where her children and their children wouldn't have to face the same battles. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that world was possible.